I'd like to continue our conversation with a little bit on organizational risks and risk factors. I'll just do that through showing you a couple of tools that you can use to sort of mitigate risk in your organization. And when I talk about it, I mean interpersonal risks. Um, Negotiation would be a good place to start. This simple two by two grid depicts basically the concept of advocacy versus inquiry. It's relatively simple. So you can see just in the bottom left hand corner, if neither exists, if there's low advocacy from your perspective or low inquiry from your perspective, if none of that is going on in a conversation, then obviously nothing is happening. That's a big zero. If only advocacy is happening, so if somebody is basically saying what they think without asking what the other person thinks, then that can be perceived as somebody who's pushing or forcing an agenda. The opposite of that would be, what if there's no advocacy but only questioning, high levels of inquiry? That can come across as very, very uncomfortable. That could be perceived as an interrogation. So, simply stated, you really need to have a balance between advocacy and inquiry. You need to have the ability to, say what's on your mind and listen to what's on other people's mind, and that's where any form of learning and cooperation, that's what's going to make that all happen. So, fairly simple starting point here. What I'll do now is go to a very important topic. This is one that really you can certainly pay attention to. It's this idea of decision-making strategies. And decisions are going to be made, of course. Uh, the actual decision that's made has less of a risk on an organization than how it's made. Uh, People need to know that decisions are being made properly. Decisions run through the gamut. They run from directive to participatory. So, for example, an individual dominance or a minority influence approach. So, the individual dominance could be something as simple as, look, I'm the senior leader here. This is very important to me, and I have to make the decision on this. Minority influence might be if there's let's say there's a highly technical area that very few people have knowledge of. You might pick the top people in that particular area and say, all right, you two or three go, study the issue and come back to us with your recommendations. So that would be an example of minority influence. Unanimous view would be when everybody has to agree. Consensus view would be when you kind of talk it through and kind of directionally get buy-in from the group. And majority rules is a simple vote. So those are sort of your from top to bottom. And how decisions are made can be based basically on the situation around you. So if there was a circumstance where people needed to have expertise to make a decision, and the amount of information required was high, then clearly it would be towards the directive approach in either individual dominance or minority influence. If you require a lot of buy-in from the group because it's a very personal, tough issue, then that might be more consensus or unanimous. If there's a low level of trust in the group, that might also mean consensus or unanimous view. If it's time sensitive, it might be only appropriate to use individual dominance. Let's say there's a danger inside the building, it's on fire or something, follow me to the exit would be an example of individual dominance. If there was many different departments or functions that are involved, or a problem is highly severe, those might take more conversation, such as consensus or a unanimous view. So you'll notice I didn't mention the one in the middle, the majority rules, as an appropriate. And I'll tell you why. If you're going to be a leader, sadly, majority rules is the one you should avoid completely. It's a cop-out, and it actually creates more problems than you'll ever want to deal with. So I'll give you. So when you're talking about majority rules and people actually vote, that means you haven't worked through the issue. So you have people on one side of an issue, you have people on another side of an issue, and if you vote, you basically have created an organization of winners and losers. And long term, when there are losers, those people can get in the way of progress, and you really don't want to do that in an organization. You don't want to have people who feel that they're not a part of your strategy. So avoid that one at all costs. It never works out. I mean, frankly, it could be something as docile as, where are we going to go to lunch today? And the people who wanted the other place don't have as good a time. And then, of course, there's some more serious issues, and you really want to be able to talk those things through. Now, one tool which has actually saved me on so many occasions is this idea of consensus. Where you can't get unanimous. Consensus is actually, it actually is just as good. And this tool here, called the levels of consensus, I used it so many times, and I will tell you, I used it with senior people who carried this thing around when conversations were going on and on and on, and there seemed to be no resolution whatsoever. So we'd say, okay, pull out your levels of consensus and let's see where we are on this conversation right now on a scale of 1 to 6. So if you read number 1, it says, I can say unqualified yes to the decision. I am satisfied that the decision is an expression of the wisdom of the group. So that person is in agreement. Number 2, I find the decision perfectly acceptable. It sounds like that person's in agreement. I can live with the decision. I'm not especially enthusiastic about it. When we start to get into number 3 and number 4, we start to see that people are kind of directionally agreeing. There's a couple of things they don't like, but number 3 really is agreement. Number 4, I do not fully agree with the decision and need to register my view of it. However, I do not choose to block the decision. I am willing to support the decision because I trust the wisdom of the group. So this is the person who's going to go along. They're not losers. They are saying, let's give it a shot. You guys see something that I don't see. Let's give it a shot. The number 4 person is actually in agreement. And frankly, when we think about these conversations that go on and on and on, the reason they're going on and on is because of these subtleties. It's like, I'm not enthusiastic about it. I want to register my view of it, right? The fact that they're willing to support it, you could end the conversation, right, and move on. If there is somebody who is, I do not agree with the decision and feel the need to stand in the way of this, now that's very different. That's somebody who's going to block the decision, and you probably want to get under the hood as to why. Why? What is it behind? Maybe there's something that's unstated that can be included in the conversation. And of course, number 6, there's no sense of unity in the group. We're all over the place. We need to do a lot more work before we reach consensus. If you have a lot of 5s and 6s, that means you might need to bring some outside facilitation. Maybe there's something about the leader that's, making people think the wrong way. Or don't feel good about it, I should say. So, but I would highly recommend having a tool like this in your pocket to kind of touch base with the temperature of the group. As I said, it's pulled me out of a lot of jams. It's a very simple tool. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it could save you a lot of time. Next, I'd like to spend a brief amount of time on the work of Gordon Allport and his ideas around diversity. He actually called them fencing. He was one of an architects of The Nature of Prejudice, was a book that he wrote. And basically, people create fences around themselves. There are people who are on the inside of the box and the people who are on the outside of the box. And as you see, this guy over here is outside the box. So what Allport is basically suggesting is, what is it about that person that makes them outside the box? And what is it that we can do to open up the box and redraw the box to include them to be inside, to be part of us? And it's that willingness, that openness to find out about people who have maybe different views. It could be somebody, the basic things, you hear through the media and all that. These basically sometimes boil down to, basic, race and gender issues. But for the most part, those are in corporate world, those are not usually the issues that create, fragmentation. It's usually more, thought processes, cultural issues, could be reward and recognition issues. It could be so many things that contribute to this. So whatever they are, the best thing to do is to sort of kind of figure it out, reach outside your box, see if you can learn things outside the box and expand your box. And that's sort of what has led to a lot of today's current conversations around diversity in the workplace. One particularly interesting area around diversity in the workplace is this personality. Personality is one of the ones that really seem to get in the way so often. And you guys may have seen the Myers-Briggs personality type. For example, how do you see the world? How do you focus your energy? The person who's the extrovert is somebody who, when given a problem, the first thing they'll do is go out and talk to everybody and get information, whereas the introvert is somebody who would, kind of shut down, think it through, be more internally driven. Neither of these is right, neither of these is wrong, but when put in a room together, can actually lead to some very interesting dissension. The introvert will be very annoyed by the extrovert in certain circumstances, and vice versa. So that's something to just know, is that sometimes our personality preferences can be the leading cause of problems. How you focus on basic information. The sensor is somebody who can react to stimuli, who can induce, can be inductive in their thought process, whereas an intuitor needs to have the picture. They need to have a top-down thought process, big picture. They can't process details or are uncomfortable processing details unless there's some model they could run it through, whereas a sensor doesn't need the model. In fact, they could build a model bottom up, but they really don't need it. The thinkers and the feelers, the thinker makes decisions based on facts, and the feelers make decisions based on the impact on people. Those can be extremely divisive conversations when you think about the perspectives, those two opposite perspectives. Judging versus perceiving. Some folks like things to be decided on, and so they could move on, shut things down, close down topics so we could move to the next topic. Let's get this thing done. Versus the perceiver, who doesn't like to close things down, who prefers to keep things open just in case something new pops up and they can adapt it, and what have you. So what is the whole point of this? Is that, unfortunately, people think that they are branded. Myers-Briggs does not define you. It doesn't hard code you. It actually is more related to your preference. You prefer to be an introvert. You prefer to be a perceiver, right? You prefer to base things on facts. You prefer to look at things top down. That doesn't mean you can't be the other. In fact, to be successful, you actually have to be able to demonstrate all of these things. As somebody, myself, who is an introvert, pretty high-scoring introvert actually on the scale, I had to learn how to give presentations to small groups, to large groups, groups of 2, groups of 200, as a perceiver, somebody who, likes exploring and getting new information. But many people in the business world like to see results and get things done. Knowing that, my opposite score actually becomes my blind spot, and I have to actually build skills in things that I am not comfortable with. So to use the perceiver as an example, even though my preference was perceiver, I became an outstanding project manager. I taught myself all the techniques. I created all the grids. I did all the status updates. I did all the measurement tracking, everything I possibly could do. And status was a way for me to sort of keep the judges happy. Is like, here's where we are right now in accordance with the plan. But status can change, which is something that makes the perceiver very happy. Um, Generally speaking, ESTJ tends to be the predominant executive profile. So if we were to kind of go to all the different types of, what's there. So if we look at ESTJ, they're very practical, realistic, matter of fact, decisive, quickly move to implement decisions. They organize projects and people to get things done. They focus on getting results in the most efficient way possible. They take care of routine details. They have a clear set of logical standards, systematically follow them and want others to do so, and they are forceful in implementing their plans. That is the classic executive. That is the way the majority of them are. Interestingly, if I come over here, I only overlap them, if I look at myself, I overlap them in one way. I am the T, but I'm the opposite in all the others. Somebody like myself who seeks to develop logical explanations for everything that's of interest to me. I'm theoretical and abstract at times. I'm interested in ideas more than in social interactions because that's my introvert. I'm oftentimes quiet, contained, but I am flexible and adaptable. I am extremely able to focus in depth on solving problems in something that interests me. I can dive as deep as anybody. I can be skeptical. I want to see things. I'm very analytical, and I can be critical of things, but I'm doing that to sort of try to learn, right? Now, in a nutshell, it's not a bad thing to be an INTP, but I will tell you that when I was running my organization, quite successfully, I might add. In fact, I got a President's Club award at American Express, and it was a nice little trip that they sent me on. I didn't do it by being an INTP all the time. No, 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 no. I had to demonstrate, use my strength of being an introvert, but sometimes I needed to be an extrovert. I needed to use my strength of being an intuitor, but also be a sensor. I needed to understand, as a P, that benefited us sometimes, but really the J is the person that gets results. And in fact, even though there weren't many Fs in my circles that I was a part of, still people were a part of my process, right? So, and they say that people with the N and the P actually have an easier time looking like an F because an N person sees that that people are part of the system. And that's kind of an important thing. And the perceiver understands that people can bring you new ideas. So there are some things that can be extremely helpful there. So, but again, from using Allport's, fencing theory, this more than anything else inside companies, these personality conflicts really are boiling down to people just are different. And I think Myers-Briggs, while it's not necessarily, 100% valid all the time, it's really directionally good and something that you can certainly use as you're trying to explore, differences within your organization. So with that, I'm going to leave it at that for now, and I look forward to our further discussions on this topic.